This is our monthly brand implementation partner spotlight. Also, you can think of this as just a guest expert training, right? Like we're bringing in some outside guest experts that we have strategic partnerships with at Brand Builders Group to just let them come in and serve the community and share some of their insights and expertise based on whatever they do. So last month, it was really cool. We had Jessica Schrademan from Schrademan Law come in and talk about all things legal considerations, trademarks, copyrights, all this fun stuff you need to think about when you're building out your business and your brand and your messaging to set yourself up for success and make sure you don't get a letter in the mail saying, hey, you can't use that anymore, and somebody trying to take you to court or something, which is always a good thing. And then this month, we are so blessed to have Morgan Ciani. I had to ask her the last name, how do you pronounce it? So Ciani, I think I got it close, with us. So she's with Cultivate Advisors, another one of our strategic partners. And we're going to be talking about all things planning for a new year. I know it's hard to believe that we are in November now. It's crazy. Thanksgiving will be here before we know it, and then Christmas, and then, oh man, we're in a new year. So many people have probably already been thinking about the new year and just kind of strategic planning, whatever it may be. But if you haven't, now's the time to definitely be doing that. And Morgan's going to just drop a bunch of knowledge on us today on not only how to think about planning for a new year, but also how to weave in kind of key financial considerations, like what financial metrics are you monitoring, not monitoring, how do you monitor them, how often should you, etc. When it comes to just making sure you've got a healthy financial business, right? That's always good, is the numbers are working out financially. And so Cultivate Advisors, just so you know, positioning wise, we think of them as kind of a strategic partner that goes hand in hand with phase 4 of our curriculum. So you guys probably already know, phase 1 is all about branding and positioning. Phase 2 is marketing. Phase 3 is selling, and phase 4 is scaling. So as your business gets traction, starts taking off, you're scaling up systems, you're scaling up people, you're scaling up processes. And so naturally, as things grow, you need to pay really close attention to numbers and metrics and all these key things to just make sure that you've got a durable business. So they come in and work with tons of different businesses to do a variety of different things, but we just look at them as a strategic partner to help clients as things are starting to take off. And so naturally, today we're going to dive into planning and making sure your business is going to grow in the new year and how to make sure your financials are supporting that. So Morgan, welcome.
Thank you. I always love talking about financials.
Yeah. It depends. Like ideally it's financials in a good way, right? Like, oh, you got good numbers, like let's grow them even bigger. But either way, whether it's good news or bad news, you got to pay attention to them, right? And put a plan in place to kind of move them in the right direction. So
well, Jeremy, you'd be surprised. It's usually like, let's talk about financials, because it's the one thing that's kind of boring or maybe uncomfortable. So as an entrepreneur, I think, what I'll just share immediately is like no judgment zone, right? I think I can speak to this being an entrepreneur myself. We go into business because we're passionate about a thing, or we, know the thing, or we see a demand and we're like, let's go capitalize on it. But then we start getting into it. We're like, oh, there's all these other things I have to do. And financials always becomes one of those.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's so many different things to monitor that, especially in the early stages where you're wearing multiple hats, right? It's just easy to, maybe that's not your thing, or it is, and you're just pulled in so many directions. So, well, I love it. And just a reminder for everybody, we've got, an hour here, 50 minutes left. This is going to be super informal. Morgan's got a few slides to share along the way to reinforce key things she wants to kind of communicate. But if you have questions, pop them in the chat. If it's like urgent, oh man, like let's do it now, come off mute, interrupt us, right? That's, the goal here is to, for Morgan to share value add information, but for you to actually like get your questions answered. So, interrupt us, put it in the chat. We'll carve out some time at the end for Q&A if you didn't do something on the fly, but but feel free to do that. Okay. And then let me go ahead. I gotta make sure Morgan gets the full official intro. So I'm gonna take you through her official bio here. So Morgan owned and operated multi-unit high-end fitness studios before becoming an advisor, cohort leader, and partner at Cultivate Advisors, where she has worked with hundreds of businesses in 40 plus industries. Morgan helped one client create a strategy for a licensed business model, and in less than 2 years, the owner went from one physical location to four, with three more on the way. She helped another client build a 5-year exit strategy, which opened up new opportunities for growth. Pulling out of the daily operations, Morgan's clients scaled the business by recruiting new talent, which enhanced revenue, production, and company value. Morgan was a D1 college scholarship athlete, playing
Volleyball.
volleyball. We were talking about this earlier. And retains a love-hate relationship with running and rowing. I can totally relate to the running. We were talking earlier, I played college soccer, and it's like, man, talk about a sport where you got to run a bunch. Like, soccer is it. And I definitely have a love-hate relationship with that. So although born and raised on the East Coast, she absorbed a West Coast vibe while living in San Diego during her formative adult years. Morgan finally settled down on the Third Coast, Chicago, where she gives back to the community by advising a local nonprofit and serving as area chairperson for economic development. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Everybody give Morgan a round of applause there. So I'd love to hear from the group before we dive in. Put in the chat, I think we've kind of hit where everybody's at, if you want to put where you're coming in from, but how many of you have started some type of planning for the new year in some way, thinking about, like, just put a yes in the chat if you're like, yeah, whether it's a big deal or not. I want to just take the pulse on everybody. Yes, I've started. Burr, yes. Okay, awesome. Thinking about, okay, cool. Yeah, I think everybody's definitely thinking about it, and so the timing is now. This is perfect. And so Morgan, when you think about this, planning for a new year, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen? I mean, you guys live in this all day, every day with hundreds of businesses you're advising. What are some of the biggest mistakes? I feel like there's so many different, like methodologies, and we use Traction as kind of like what Brand Builders Group uses, but like, what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes out there when it comes to, like trying to plan for a new year, and also just the role of financials within the context of that?
Sure. I think the biggest mistake is people start too late.
Mm.
And if you're starting now, it's great, but it's too late.
Dang it. We should have had this training. When should we have had better late than never, but like, when should we have had the training?
Yeah. So, and I mean that with humor. Anytime is great, right? To start planning. The thing to think about is, as we kind of enter into Q4, there are some some groundwork that could be done prior to that. Obviously, Q4 is important because you're rounding out financials, et cetera. But September is a really great time to really just revisit the vision and the long-term goals. And then that will help kind of, reestablish, like, why am I doing this? That changes. It changes every year. It can change, every couple months as the business is growing through the evolution. So that would be my biggest kind of, not takeaway, but thing to just remember is starting early is good.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, because I'll raise my hand. I make that mistake too. It's kind of like, oh, September. Well, yeah, I'm like trying to dial in, changes for Q4. It's like, all right, cool. Like, what are we clear on what we're doing? Like, what is our goals, objectives, KPIs, like, whatever tweaks we're making for our key objectives in Q4. And it's like, oh, but I also need to be thinking about the whole, I mean, it seems really far away in September, but it's like, like you're saying, it's actually, that is the time to be doing it. Can you unpack that a little bit for me? Like, what is, what is the reason you want to obviously be focused on finishing the year strong, right? So you need to still in whatever in Q3 be clear about setting goals, objectives for Q4, right? But also, that far in advance, starting to think about the new year. What's really the reason? Because I totally agree. I think most people are, the worst thing, but most people I think are like, it's around Christmas holidays. Like, it's like, oh, cool. It's like the downtime, New Year's resolutions, like, cool. Like,
Yep.
let's create some goals for the new year. Right. So it's like totally last minute. But definitely all the way in September is pretty early. So just unpack that a little bit, like
Yep.
the why. Why do you need to start so soon?
Yeah, I think like um probably the most important thing is it doesn't mean it has to be completely locked in, right? But it gives you that space and it gives you the time to actually put the time and space in your life to start rethinking about the vision, rethinking about the why, rethinking about, what are the macro goals that I want to achieve this year? So you're not really like, you're not taking it all the way down or boiling it all the way down. It's just kind of, hey, I need this space. I'm going to take September to just really think through this. And then really what it means is take an hour, out of the day, or take a couple hours out of the week and just carve that time out to start, like I said, boiling that vision down. And then that will help. Those are like the two steps that I would recommend, like in September, right? Is big picture vision, long-term goals, and then those annual macro goals. And so what I mean by that is like, what are the three most important metrics in the business that you need to track and that you need to make sure you achieve
For the
coming
new,
year?
like annual objectives, annual
Annual,
goals.
yep.
Is that right? Gotcha.
Correct. Yep.
So how do you, and NECA had a question here. How often do you review your vision strategy during the year? So,
That's a very good question.
yeah, maybe hit that, because I think is a little bit of pacing. It's a good thing to get your sense for how often are you doing whatever, and then we can obviously dive into specifics for planning. But what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, totally. So I'm not gonna kick the can on that. I'm gonna answer that. And I think as we kind of continue through the discussion, you'll see, but I will kind of high level say, there are different stages of business, right? And so if you're in it and operating in it, where you're like, you're not just working on the business, but you're the business, you're working in it constantly. I would recommend like reviewing things monthly, reviewing your micros, probably weekly, monthly. And then on a quarterly basis, really kind of regrouping and saying what happened and then trending, right? To say, here's what has to happen now because of the result here, the previous quarter result. So it's almost like the way I describe it is like, I don't say anything new. I found the things that work and I just keep saying them. It's like a stovetop, right? The stovetop has, 5, 6 burners. Those two in the front are those high percolate, right? Those are high heat. You get things moving, you get it bubbling. And then you have the ones in the back that are kind of on simmer, and you're just kind of doing this. So, sometimes you're watching things really carefully. And then sometimes you're like, those are just going. I'm just going to let them simmer. They're going, but I have to check on them. And that's kind of the way you look at these macro to micro. And then I'll use a lot of acronyms and terms here. And if I'll do my best to remember to clear them all up. But if there's something I'm saying, you're like, I don't know what that is, just let me know. But those also turn into initiatives, right? And that turns into like project management. So it sounds really overwhelming, but when you start boiling it down and peeling away the onion or whatever, expression you want to use, it becomes really manageable. And they're levers that you get to control.
I love it. So just to make sure I'm tracking with that, you kind of have maybe a little bit more of an intensive annual planning kind of session towards the end of a year, let's say September, October, whenever. But then as you get into the normal rhythm, it's, you have some weekly, monthly kind of cadence to look at key data points and make any necessary adjustments on the fly. really leading up to a quarterly, more comprehensive review of how did it go, and then so look back and then use that to look forward with intention.
100%.
And okay, cool, I love it. So and as we walk through this, we can dive deeper into some of that, if we need to. So well, all right, so I love it. So take us through, as you think about, okay, hey, we're obviously late to the game, but late is better than never. So if we are thinking about, if somebody's thinking about, all right, cool, like I want to put together a really good plan for 2023. And I've seen tips, tricks, I've seen all the things out there. But what do you feel are some key best practices when it comes to just what to do as you are planning for a new year? Right.
Totally. So let me just make sure is anyone here solo? Is anyone here have teams? Kind of what's the tell me in the chat what's happening. Okay.
Solo, I think, Doherty solo. Yeah, I know Doherty.
Okay.
Outsource books. Okay.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So it sounds like, most smaller business solopreneur
Great.
at this point, but it's going to take off, right? It's just a matter of time, right? So,
okay. So then let me kind of break down a little bit of how I would high level, the structure of what we consider the planning methodology, right? So as we talked about, September is kind of where you're taking the time, you're carving out, as like a productivity measure, you're carving out space to really just think about, okay, why am I doing this? What's the plan for next year? And then once you hit those like three, like I said, like chunks, like rock metrics that you're like, this has to happen. Then kind of in October is when you start peeling away and looking at like, what are the key performance indicators or the like metrics that I really want to identify and push through like on a macro level to all areas in the business. So, that's financials. We call them propellers. So it's like financials, sales, marketing, productivity, leadership, and recruiting, if those two are appropriate, right? And so within each one of those propellers in the business, what things now have to happen on a more micro level, right? So we've hit the macro, which let's say is like a revenue goal. Maybe it's a, number of events that you want to speak. Maybe it's, number of new clients you want to get, whatever those are. And then you boil that down now into, okay, in terms of financials, what does that mean? If I'm going to do these top three things, how does that fold into the financials on a macro level? So it could mean, this much revenue, could mean, it could mean a budget, an expense line or goal, and then tying that to sales. What does that mean for sales? What does that mean for conversions? What does my conversion rate have to be? What does that mean for leads then, right? So it all ties into this. So having that.
So you like reverse engineering? Is that kind of the idea
Totally.
there is, hey, I want to hit $1 million, in revenue in 2023. So let me reverse engineer. Okay, look, we're looking at a quarter million each quarter. Like, all right, what are we focusing on selling? If it's via you as a speaker or you as your consulting or workshops, whatever your prime, like again, BBG terminology, your primary business model, this is the main thing we think will help us get traction and get to $1 million next year. So based on how you're pricing that means we need to be selling X number of this each quarter. How does that back into monthly? How does that back into week? I mean, is that kind of the idea, is just big annual goal, but then let's chop it into a manageable number or metric that we can monitor on a micro level? Is that kind of the idea?
Totally. So if I were to break it down and I'll go maybe a little slow on this one, is just note-taking wise, if that's important. So on the financial side, you're getting more detailed than the prior year, right? And then you're taking essentially the plan isn't necessarily finalized. It's like, this is just, what we think has to happen. And then my biggest thing is like, what's the cash threshold that has to occur during this whole year, right? And we'll,
Can you elaborate on, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Maybe not now or whenever the time is right. Elaborate on cash threshold. I feel
Yep.
like, okay, cash, I understand cash. Okay, like I'm sure there's some technical explanation to make me
Yeah,
understand
totally.
it.
So I'll hit on it a little bit. So that cash threshold is like, what do I always want to make sure I have in cash? So the best kind of benchmark is what we really encourage and work towards with our clients is 2.5 to 3 times your monthly expenses.
I
And so it
love
doesn't mean
that.
it happens overnight, right? But it means you're tracking that and building out the strategy to say, okay, by this point of the year, I will be there because of all these other things that I'm doing within the business. And
That's
so
good.
when we
So
talk,
I just wanted, so 2.5 to 3 times your monthly expenses. So if you're a solopreneur, I mean, you're having what's your draw or what do you want to
correct,
be making? And then it's like software, et cetera, like any other direct expenses you may have
travel,
for,
right,
yeah. So
right.
it's like, all right, what are overall expenses? And we're shooting for 2.5 to 3 times that number that you want to have available in cash on a monthly
As like
basis,
a
just to
safety net,
provide, yeah, just that peace of mind,
totally.
right? Okay, cool.
Yeah, it makes you sleep nicely at night.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, we all want that.
Um, and then on the sales side, right, it's like connecting the needed revenue to the sales and the sales conversions that tie to the pipeline that now tie to the number of leads that you need, right? Which then folds to marketing. So there's two sides of the business, right? There's the growth side of the business, which is the center is always, the fulcrum is always financials. And then that feeds the sales and marketing. And then sales and marketing is growth, right? Because that's what grows the business. Then as the business grows, when you have the really clear financial strategy, you get to see the breaking points or the bottlenecks because you get to see a capacity issue. So then when that happens, the fulcrum, the lever now tilts and it says, okay, now we have to focus on capacity. And what does that mean? But we can see it in the financial plan because if I want to get to 1 million in revenue, it's going to take me 26 clients, but each client takes X amount of time. You're going to, oh, okay. In November, that's when I'm going to need an admin, or that's when I'm going to need, maybe a second person to take on maybe onboarding, right? Because that'll relieve me 20 hours in the month.
So if we just using the same
Yep.
simplistic scenario of 1 million, our goal is 250 a quarter or whatever. Doing coaching, just keep it simple, like coaching, one-on-one coaching is my primary business model. So I charge X for that. But if you don't do the work to say, I'm charging that because it takes me this much time plus some percentage markup for overhead, et cetera, you don't have the details to then know, project or forecast out when you might run into some delivery bottlenecks, right? Like, okay, hey, this is mid-year, like if we're on track to hit our numbers of new clients, this is now when we got to start adding some more capacity on the back end. Is that right? So it's almost like at the micro of micro levels, it's about what are all the tasks associated with doing whatever it is you're doing. And let's make sure, estimate hours, what kind of effective hourly, what rate do you want to use for that? That gives us some time for, value for your time. And then we do some markup for sales marketing, overhead, some profit margin, obviously. Is that, I mean, really you need to start at that detailed of a level to have, and it's not going to be perfect. Like I've always said, like humans are awful at estimating how much time it takes to do anything.
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, you always have to be like, all right, well, let's think about it and do our best. Right. But then ultimately, you always have to be monitoring those numbers, right, to be making adjustments. But you really, I mean, if you haven't done that already, that's a pretty foundational component of this. Is that accurate?
That's true. And it, and again, we kind of mentioned this in the beginning, the financials is not always the fun part, right? It's not always like the super exciting part. Spreadsheets are not great. They're not like, exciting. But the financial strategy or the financial roadmap really is that. It's the roadmap that shows you kind of, we're starting in New York, we're going to California. Here are the gas stations, here are the restaurants, here's the hotels, right? That's all that financial plan. That's what that helps to do, is just give you those points of reference that now tie to exactly what you said. All of those pieces of, and there are, at first, maybe there's not a whole lot that has to happen. It's just, here's where I am, here's where I want to go. And then connecting, I have, like, again, on the sales side, I have small, medium, and large value. What does that mean? What capacity do each one of those take? So if a small is, we'll use the consulting model again, 2 hours, the medium is 4 hours, the large is 6. Okay, great. What's the diversity of the portfolio to that total revenue? So if it's 20%, 30%, 20%, or 50%, then it's, okay, this is how much time I need to make all of that happen. And then you get to see that break.
I love it. Okay. So it is, you really have to kind of have the low level details that just get packaged in bigger and bigger packages or metrics to kind of even roll up to this annual goal or objective, right? That's just to bring this back to annual planning. It's,
Totally.
yeah, what's a realistic number of annual goals or objectives to set? Like when you think about it, because I know it's always like, oh, like we want to do all these things, but
Sure.
like you can't. It's that value of focus and discipline. So what is that right number? And I'm sure it changes as your business gets bigger and you have more people to throw at this stuff. But for early stage companies, like what do you see as the right number of annual objectives to focus
I
on?
say 3.
Okay.
Hit the 3, right? If you are one who likes a lot of detail, put that into the micro, right? But when you're like, hey, this is what I'm tracking at the highest level, hit those 3 major macro goals. Otherwise it becomes overwhelming. And you can only do so much, right? And so then things start dropping to the floor. Yeah, so like as examples, I would say, if we keep using this model, right? Or the example we have is, I would say, revenue.
Okay, that's a good one. So where are you at right now? Where do you want to be? And do you basically, when you say tie back to the prior year, you say, okay, cool, we're in October, September, October, let's say we're in November now, but either way, we have a sense for how we're trending, revenue wise for the current year. So we forecast, okay, we'll end up at, 800K or, 4 million, like whatever it is. And when you think about that annual goal for the next year around financials, how do you think about, because it's like, oh, I'd love to be at 2 million. I'm only at 500K. Like you have to be realistic. So like, do you tend to set like, all right, industry average, early stage businesses? I mean, there's always unicorns, but on average, you're gonna, you may see a 10 or a 20 or like whatever percent growth. And so don't get too crazy, but like what's that happy medium when you would think of like how to push yourself a little bit, but still be realistic for the revenue goal?
Yep, totally. That's where flexing this like financial muscle becomes really important. And being able to create assumptions and scenarios, right? So I'm a huge fan of what's the must happen, right? Like that's the floor. Like we can't go backwards, right?
Okay.
So what must happen, like minimum amount of growth. Then setting that mid goal of, if all goes the way we are planning, we want to hit that 25% year-over-year growth. That's that mid. And then always having that like BHAG, right? where
Hmm.
this would be super awesome if we did this. Um,
Yeah.
it's going to take a lot. It's, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but this would be really cool. I don't know if we all can agree, but I'll say, I think we maybe can all agree is that if you put it out there and you're looking at it, it's more likely to happen than if you don't put
Absolutely.
it at all, right?
So true.
So that's kind of how I would have those 3 financial models so that there's those scenarios that can play out. So as you are retrending and as you are reviewing prior numbers and looking at like what's in your pipeline, you can say, we are actually trending toward that like mid goal. So now we're just going to start shifting our plan. We're going to turn that plan
Yeah.
up. We're going for it.
I love it. So you kind of create those good, better, best, right scenarios, and then you still have the micro metrics that support each of them, so you can be
Totally.
cross-referencing actuals to the forecast, and then it's like, oh, we're trending towards the better or the best, or so I love that. What and we can get back into the details on that, but what would be the example of another good annual goal that's
Sure.
not just a revenue target?
Yep. If sales, which I'm assuming it is, right, is a major part of the revenue, I love looking at conversion rates. I love looking at, because it's an amazing lever. And if you can
Mm-hmm.
improve your conversion rate, you need less leads, right? Which is nice. So that to me is a really nice one is, if I'm converting at, in your funnel, 20%, 40%, and then 80%, how do I improve that 20%
Mm-hmm.
so that I need less at the front end? And that could lead to a lot of things, right? That could be a lot of skill. It could be maybe it's the wrong persona you're looking for, maybe kind of redoing that exercise. So that's a huge one that I love.
Yeah, that is so good. I love that one too. And most of our clients, we always kind of really drive home, hey, keep it simple. The fastest path, to cash is one, leveraging your network, obviously outbound, kind of like sales things, but free presentations. I've got really good value add information I can deliver to 1 or 5 or 50 or 500 people. I would love to just go give value for free and then drive to another free call on the back end, which is not, hey, schedule a free sales call. It's a free branded value add call. So fastest path is free value to free conversation to deliver more value and then see if it makes sense to close them. So it's so easy to just say, hey, everything drives to request a free in our ecosystem, right? Brand strategy call. And then it's, if you got the right systems in place, or just, use a spreadsheet if you have to keep it simple to start. But it's like monitor your ability to convert people on that sales
Totally.
call. And it's
It's
just like,
huge.
and sometimes, you may see you don't have a lead problem, you got a conversion problem,
Yeah,
or you may have both, or you may convert at a really high level, and it's like, man, we just got to figure out how to drive more traffic into this thing. But I love that, just because that is, I guess, would you consider that like a leading indicator, right? Like it's like, hey, your ability to convert at a high level naturally is going to let you hit your metrics to then roll up to your quarterly revenue targets or
100%.
whatever.
And then even think about, getting in the weeds a little bit on this metric, like even thinking about that, think about as you control that lever, the amount of time you actually save,
Oh yeah.
which is phenomenal, right? Because then now you're increased capacity to
So
deliver,
good.
right? To create revenue.
Yeah. So, and just to connect dots for people, pressure-free persuasion in our curriculum, right, is all about just best practices of, selling, outbound sales. And, so if you're looking to fine tune some of that, that's one area to look that's available right now. So one last one, I know we could go for 2 hours on this. I'm looking at the time. So give us one, just curious as far as high level annual goals, what would maybe be a third one that pops in your mind? We're going to try to limit to 3, but just like what would be another option for a third one?
Yeah, I especially like, thinking about like everyone's here kind of like as a solo at this point. For me, it would be like a productivity metric.
Okay.
And really kind of, we've hit the revenue, we've hit the lever of conversion and sales, right? Now it's like that productivity piece. And, really, there's the quadrant of like urgent and important, urgent, not important, right? And really working through that exercise so that you're not getting pulled away on things that feel urgent, but really aren't and aren't, can wait. And then really controlling your time in order to focus on the business and actually growing the business.
So, and that's an awesome one too. So is the idea there of saying like, okay, based on where the business is and thus all the things that need to get done to grow the business, as of right now, the best use of my time, is X, X, and X, right? These are the things that aren't urgent, right? I mean, it's like, hey, this is what and then just basically saying, hey, right now I need on average each week, each month or whatever to spend X hours on this activity because that is a critical activity that is the best use of my time. And then just holding yourself accountable to it. Is that
Totally.
kind of the concept?
And if you roll these 3 up, right, it's productivity to activity, which is that sales piece, right? And the conversion piece. And so if if you're tracking that and you know what you're converting, you know how much time you have to spend within that activity, which then leads to the generation of revenue. And Burr, you put it in there that you outsource your books. Yeah, amazing, right? That time that it probably takes someone to reconcile and do all this stuff, it's probably better spent generating the revenue or controlling other levers and outsourcing something that someone can do much faster.
Burr, how long you been doing that? Yeah, I mean, is that kind of the why, and has it worked out well for you to say,
Yeah,
what am I great at?
it's been about 3.5 years, and just know thyself, right? And I'm going to play to my strengths. I know that this is not an area of strength for me, and yet I do want to. I mean, I joined this call because I want to continue to expand my knowledge and not be ignorant of what's going on in my business. And I have a great team that does support me. They give me updates. They'll give me as much detail as I want. But yeah, it's been helpful for me, and I no longer. I was living in a state of fear constantly that I wasn't doing something correctly, and especially come tax season. And so that's why I outsource. And again, to direct my time and energy in better places.
Yeah, and
couldn't
especially,
agree more.
yeah, I mean, like tax strategy and all that is not the easiest thing unless it's just how your brain works. So it's kind of like if you think about, hey, the right strategy can actually save you a lot of money. It's like you may just recoup the investment just with
Totally.
a few little tweaks in your strategy, right? So it's something that is not easy or super accessible knowledge and can have a big impact just on ROI with it. So I love that one. Awesome, cool. So we've got the 3 annual goals, one around revenue, one around like a key sales conversion type thing that leads to revenue, and then one around productivity and the best use of your time to make sure you're actually able to invest in. And one thing I'll say on that last one, we're obviously a personal brand strategy firm. So our unique angle to help businesses grow is how do we work with one or more individuals and continue to elevate, awareness of them through their personal brand as an extension or key thought leader in some space. And that drives traffic, growth back to the business. So one thing that you can't outsource, right, is you sharing your knowledge with as many people as possible to win their trust, can, kind of build those relationships, and then hopefully use that to shorten the sales cycle and drive traffic back, right? You can't delegate that out. So, social media obviously is a longer term ROI, but that's one way content gets distributed. But we go back to some of the early day stuff. Use your network, get out, deliver free presentations, just be out there where people see you and hear your great insights and expertise. And that's going to be, a key thing you need to spend time on, and likely delivering, right? Like fulfilling when people buy, depending on what it is you're selling. It's going to be likely hard to delegate that out in the early days too. But either way, those are a couple key things that you're going to have to keep on your plate, for sure in the early days. So Morgan, take us in. We've got the 3 annuals. Help us just with some of the tactics around how to think about chopping those into more micro, and then how to think about, like, what do we like, when and what are we looking at on a monthly and then quarterly basis? Kind of just walk into some of those details.
Sure. So then as you establish those 3 macros, then we, kind of like I said, you start creating initiatives, right? I like to look at it as like 90-day sprints. And so it could be within each bucket, that you're focused on. What are all the initiatives that are super important to ensure with a deadline that they get done? And there's 2 ways to look at that to create the deadline. This goes back to that productivity piece. It's, do you have to build something? Do you have to like do something or build something? How long is that going to take? And then do you have to implement it? And then how long does that take? Right. And then that helps to establish that deadline. From there, then it's kind of like the implementation of those initiatives, right? And so strategy, process, systems, procedures, etc. But if we pull this all the way back, if you don't have that floor to jump on, which really is that financial plan, you're going to jump and, break an ankle maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So is that just so I'm, again, it's kind of like, hey, here are the goals, like the annual goals or revenue, et cetera. But the financial plan was, okay, based on our understanding of the business now, what are our monthly expenses? Let's, make sure that at any given time we have that, 2.5, that percentage, right?
Right. So when we come back to that cash flow threshold, right? So I'm going to pose a question here. Currently, I know, Bert, you're probably using QuickBooks, I would assume, if you have a bookkeeper.
Yep.
How is everyone tracking their financials currently? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? Is it QuickBooks or a true P&L?
QuickBooks for me. Yep. And I do get a P&L quarterly.
Yep. Amazing. Okay. So you get it quarterly.
I do. Yep.
Okay. I would encourage you to get it monthly. Like a reconciled, probably mid-month.
Yeah.
That way you can kind of review it. There are a few key things on a P&L that I would encourage you to review. Starting COGS are maybe or maybe not a thing, but your margin, your expenses, and your net, and just tracking those as like a financial metric to make sure, like, am I hitting my benchmarks? That's really important.
Yep.
Do you, what's that?
Thank you. Taking tons of notes.
Yeah. So looking at, hey, let's try to get a monthly P&L ideally. Those are some key data points within that. And I'm assuming, some of those are mapping back to the supporting metrics that are tied into your annual goals, right? So you're just reconciling actuals via the P&L to some of our target metrics, right, to be on track. And it's always like, all right, cool, we're ahead or we're behind or right at. Is that kind of the concept?
Yeah. And then, there's like, I would have multiple layers of this tracking, right? So you have your monthly P&L, and then you're tracking your expenses, which then can feed into that cash flow. And you can start seeing that, I love to do it. I love conditional formatting. Turns red, turns yellow, turns green, if then. And so you start seeing like, oh, wow, here, if all of this continues the way that it should, the way that we've expected, the way that we've projected, and our expenses remain, consistent, we have control over them. Here's where we see that cash flow really starting to collect. And, we see it in, whatever, June, right? That's that mark. And so now you're running toward that mark. The other thing is, simplistically, Jeremy, as you put it, it's like, okay, the $1 million is the goal. Let's divide that by this number. A really healthy way to do it is to review prior year and dividing your monthly income by your total to get your true seasonality. I know everybody's like, oh, business is seasonal. I came from a seasonal business, in fitness. Summertime, nobody comes to the gym in August, and then everybody comes in January, right?
Yeah.
But when you can really track, like, oh, wow, January was 8%, February was 11.5%. Now that's where you can create really fine-tuned monthly goals based on some true data. And so now you take your 2023 number, that $1 million, and you now multiply it by that percentage of revenue that came in monthly from prior year. Every year is going to change. This just gives you some groundwork. And then you see, okay, great. Here's what has to happen kind of throughout the year. And then, like you said, Jeremy, now in a quarter, here's kind of the holistic of what needs to happen. And now you're reviewing, trending, gapping, right? And then now you have like a full plan.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I just know that I've always struggled with that kind of, the forecasting out. It's like, I mean, there's so many things, but it's like, it's not perfect. But if you're not at least attempting to look ahead a little bit, you can't really plan properly. Like, let's say I am projecting that we're going to need to hire some people. Like, if all this continues, if you wait until, oh crap, we don't have enough people to fulfill, we now need to hire. It's like you're
proactive
kind of like
rather than
too
reactive.
late, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it's tricky because, there's a lot of responsibilities, especially in the early days. So how do you best, I know we're getting close, but how do you, for people that are like, this is great, but I also have 50 other things I have to do, how do you really think about the best way to, one, keep it simple in the early days if you need to, but also, like I'm sure there's DIYers, but also like how to like get targeted help with this stuff if you don't want to or aren't capable, like if this isn't your jam to be doing top to bottom all of this yourself. Like what are different options to tackle that piece of it?
Sure. I mean, well, one, we can help.
Yeah. Well, that's not an option.
No,
No,
right.
we can't.
No. Truly, it's if this is not your strong suit, start flexing the muscle and make it a strong suit.
So this is not something
I don't want to say like, just don't worry about it. And just, you need to know it.
Yeah, that's good.
It's a hard line in the sand for me. There's a couple of things that I root my feet down on. And this financial piece it's everything in your business. I don't have a magic.
What do you, yeah, no, I love it. And it's like, yeah, this is not really an optional thing if you want to be smart about, growing your business.
And in control of it, really.
Yeah.
It is in control of it.
Yeah. And is the big, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but when you take more of this reactive approach, like, what are some of it's like, oh no, I'm making money, like I'm good, I'm paying myself. Like, what do you see as the top one or two like gotchas when it's like you're not really taking a tactical approach to this and you're like, okay, I can pay my, like the numbers are working, but I'm more just like looking at stuff on like kind of a casual approach to it. What creeps up on people like, oh crap, like this is why that's not sustainable, or this is what you're going to run into at some point.
Yeah. I'm gonna answer that question, but bear with me. I sit with business owners every day, right? And one of the first questions I ask is, what are your numbers? Do you know your numbers? 60% of the time, the answer is no. And it may not be that hard line, but it's like, I mean, kind of, maybe, yes. if I asked you, how much money do you have in your personal checking account? Pretty sure you could tell me, right? We have an expression, it's ridiculous, but it's cool kids know their numbers. I don't even know where it came from, but cool kids know their numbers. And what creeps up on you is you're not looking at your expenses. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, why is this happening? What creeps up on you is you don't have a clear plan for taxes every quarter. That's terrible when that creeps up on you. That happened to me my first year when I was in my early 20s running my business. I was like, wait, I owe what?
Yeah.
And then I would also say, like, when you get to Q4 and you're looking at your numbers and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't do actually what I thought I was going to do. It's because you let it go on autopilot. You weren't controlling the wheel.
Yeah. Wow. That's good. So may not be something that comes naturally to people, but not really an optional thing if you want to be proactive and professional, frankly, just if you want to take growing your business seriously and grow it as quickly as possible, you really need to understand at a basic level, medium level, whatever the stuff, and you need to actually practice it. And if you want help, there's options to get help with it, you guys being one and others out there. So I love that.
Yeah, it's
I'd
like
love
hobby
to,
or business, right? Like
what'd you say is
hobby or business, right?
yeah, it's so true. Yeah. So I see, Burr, I want to just open it up for any final questions. If anybody had anything before we wrap, just to make sure we create space for that. Burr, do you have something here?
For adding your first employee.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
What do you see as some common mistakes people make? If that I've outsourced some, I had a part-time admin that just wasn't that helpful because I had to direct like every single step, and it was like I might as well just do it myself. And she wasn't picking things up, and so I kind of gave up, and I used that as an excuse to just do it myself for the last couple of years with no help. And I find myself working on things that I know are not the best use of my time and energy. So I know I'm completely maxed out, and I need to let go of some stuff. So
Burr, you're hitting on another one of the things I root my feet down on, and it's onboarding. When someone doesn't have a clear onboarding path or structure for someone, it's exactly what you just experienced. We're like, forget it, I'm just going to do it myself. So what I mean by that is, I'm going to use a generic time frame. It doesn't always have to be within this time frame, dependent upon the role, dependent upon the tasks, but like a 30, 60, 90. And the way to look at that, those 3 time buckets, right? Whether it's 15, 30, 45, whatever it is proficiency, competency, mastery. So basically a checklist. Like, what do they need to know, like in the first 30 days of doing this job for me, or being a team member for me? Here's the checklist. In the first 30 days, I need to make sure that they are proficient in these things. The next one is, now that they have this jump off, what do they need to be competent in? And I'm going to start giving them things where they get to do it on their own. I'm going to check it. I'm going to give them support. I'm going to give them coaching. I'm going to give them feedback. And then in that 90-day period, or again, whatever the third one is what do I need them to be masterful at, so that I can go ahead and trust and let them be autonomous in a way and hold attention and accountability, but I know that they feel confident in doing it. And then you have your 6-month review, right? And then you have your 1 year. It doesn't have to be super uptight. It can be pretty casual, but at least you have these metrics that you're tracking.
Yeah. And I mean, you just nailed me. Like, I did a terrible job of that and expected her to read my mind. I dumped a bunch of information, gave her the usernames and passwords to the things she needed to know, and kind of gave her a list of things that I would love her to take on and tackle.
Sure.
But I did not have a good 30, 60, 90, that's for sure.
Yeah. And like, again, it could be any amount of time. I've done it in 15,
Sure.
30, 45. I also think, like, currently, as you guys are doing things, start documenting it. And it could be really simple, the documentation. It could even be like you're recording your screen doing something, but that way you have it as kind of a reference point for a process.
Yeah, that's so good, because I feel like with SOPs, sometimes it's like, especially in the early days of a business, stuff is changing pretty rapidly. So it's like, if you don't want to put too much into this giant
Totally.
doc, and then it's like, oh crap, nobody wants to read it. You didn't want to write it. And
Yeah.
30% of it has changed. So it's almost like, what is this MVP approach to capturing some, SOP information, recording stuff via video, simple outlines, sounds like
Yeah.
you said, that plus some clear 30, 60, 90 or whatever objectives is going to give you. Do you tend to see that first hire being kind of assistant, part-time, then to full-time, to kind of like get the administrative type things off the plate, like the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, it's usually the things that you want to let fall to the floor, right? Like making that list of like, what are the things that I'm okay with letting them fall to the floor? And then who could take that on? My big thing to think about is, exactly what you said, Jeremy, because things are still really changing really, really quickly. As you're thinking about that person that you want to hire, think about a generalist, not a specialist, because that specialist is going to get really uncomfortable to change. Or doing things outside of their scope, right?
Yeah. This is Morgan, thank you so much. I mean, we're a little over time, but thank you for your time and just, sharing your knowledge with the community. Better late than never with this stuff. We're a little bit late, but hopefully this is helpful as you guys kind of think about the new year. No more than 3, right? Try to keep it to 3 annual kind of like goals or objectives, back those into, quarterly metrics that support them, track against it, all the things. So just as a reminder, so everybody knows, I'm going to share my screen real quick. We will make this recording available through Thinkific in the membership portal, ultimately in this virtual trainings area. So virtual training recordings. So you can get to this just like all the other ones. We have the past spotlights around legal guidance, etc., from last month in there. And then the last thing is, as you know, we're a strategy firm. We have these strategic partnerships with outside companies, like Cultivate Advisors and many others that offer implementation services that extend, right, our strategy. So whether you're interested in talking with Morgan or anybody else, the way to kind of trigger that process is inside here, get implementation help. It's going to take you to this page. You say connect to vendors. It takes you to this form. And then down here, just fill out this information. We don't have one for annual planning or financials, right? But come down here and just say like fractional support. We would consider this like a fractional support, and hit submit. And basically that just gets you in our system. We'll manage that and get you connected over with Morgan and the team. If you want to just talk more about this, basically, Morgan, explain real quick, you guys are doing something which kind of blows my mind, but you're like 2 hours or something you're willing to spend with somebody just for free, or
Yeah,
talk about that.
we can help kind of deep dive on some of those questions, even help build out a little bit of a financial projection, and spend 2 hours together. It seems like a long time. The time goes by really fast, especially when you're talking about your business. And then you have, someone in the room that's not in it. So a lot of good questions come up, and a lot of good plans and solutions are kind of carved out of that time.
I love it. Well, thank you for being willing to do that. That means a lot. So awesome, guys. Well, I know we're over time. So Morgan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thank you everybody else for making the time to come, and be sure to stick around for next month. And I think, as you've seen, we continue to offer more and more group style trainings or coaching. So be sure to take full advantage of these things as we're putting them out there. Have a great week, guys. We'll talk to you soon.